Hi everyone, welcome to Rocky Chess. Now, everyone needs to know about the London system as beginners up to some grandmasters play it. Even if you don't like opening with it, you are bound to face players that do open with it, so you need to know what to do. I personally hate playing against it. It's just so annoying, and let's just see how dangerous it can be. So the London system, for anyone that does not know, involves white playing four moves. That's knight f3, d4, bishop to f4, and then e3. It does not really matter in what order, but most people prefer starting with the knight, so others are not sure which opening they are going for. And black can almost play anything here, and it will not disrupt these first four moves. So it's a solid system where white is fine defensively, but also not attacking very potently. At least initially that seems to be true, but it can very quickly turn into a very attacking system. In this game, black plays c5, and white will not usually take this pawn, as it allows black to develop his dark squared bishop, like so. White responds with c3, which is a dual purpose move. It defends the pawn on d4, as well as opening up the diagonal for the queen to move out should she need to. Black next develops his knight, and white moves the knight to d2 in order to put some pressure on the e4 square. The e4 square, along with the e5 square, are the most important squares during this opening, and if black can control them, then he or she can bust this London system. Black plays bishop to d6, as white's dark squared bishop is very dangerous, and ideally black wants to remove it. Now, it's a really bad idea for white to take black's bishop here, because black will simply recapture with the queen, and then suddenly white's opening loses a lot of its bite. Black will be fine in this situation and can have a good game. Going back to the game, rather than white taking black's bishop, what you will see more often than not is white going to g3. And basically this bishop is saying, you can have me if you want, but if you do, then you will unleash my rook, which is going to bust you up. So if black does take the bishop, white simply recaptures with the h2 pawn, and now you can see the h-file is open nicely for this rook to attack with. So in addition to the rook, white's queen, light squared bishop, and knight are all capable of moving one square and putting more pressure on the h7 square. And this spells big trouble for black's king. So if you are black, it's really best not to take white's bishop here. The best move is actually to castle. White then moves bishop to d3, which is putting pressure on the h7 square and also on the important e4 square. Black responds with b6, which makes room for the bishop to later come to b7. And now black really wants the bishop on b7, as it's on the same diagonal as the e4 square, and he wants to fight for this square. White plays queen to e2, which adds further white pressure to e4. White is looking to move the pawn to e4, which is the idea behind this move. Black plays bishop to b7, and white could already now push the pawn to e4, but decides to play rook to d1, which is a great move. We can see the d file is very crowded right now with the knight, bishop and pawn. But white knows that it will soon be semi-wide open, and white wants to control this file when that does happen. Black plays knight to e7, which bolsters black's defense and makes room for the light squared bishop to give some support to the pawn on d5. White now plays e4, and once black takes the pawn, white will have 3 defenders to black's 2 defenders, and therefore can trade pieces and advance down the board, which is what happens. Black pretty much has no choice but to take the pawn on e4, as if he plays something else, for example h6, then white can simply push the pawn to e5, and we can see that the bishop and the knight are forked, and black will go down a piece no matter what happens. So black captures the pawn on e4, and then white captures black's pawn with the knight. Black then captures white's knight on e4 with his knight, and white's bishop captures black's knight, and then black's bishop captures white's bishop, and finally white's queen captures black's bishop. After all that, they are equal in material, and no one has a superior pawn structure, and if black plays carefully here, then it's not really such a problem. But this is the critical point of the game, and the reason why the London system can be so dangerous. Okay, so as we can see, the queen is on the same diagonal as the h7 pawn, and black might be worried about the knight. For example, if white's knight jumps to g5, the next move could be checkmate. So black doesn't really want this pressure on the h7 pawn, and therefore in the game black makes a very natural looking move, which is knight to f5. I can understand why black made this move, because it blocks the diagonal of the queen to the h7 pawn, and it also prevents the queen swinging over to h4, because the knight could just take it. So it's a natural looking move, but unfortunately it is a blunder, and it leads to complete disaster, because after this white captures the pawn on c5. And sure, black can just capture back, but as you can see, the rook is pinning black's dark squared bishop. It can't move because the queen is behind it. Furthermore, white also has his dark squared bishop facing black's dark squared bishop, and therefore it's not possible for black to prevent going a piece down at this stage. So for example, white can just take it out with the bishop, and then black can capture that bishop with the knight, but then white simply moves to e5, which now attacks the knight with the queen and the rook, and there is nothing black can do to save that piece. Obviously the knight can't move, because otherwise the rook will take the queen. However, you may be thinking the knight could move, and attack white's queen at the same time. So knight to c4. However, this still leads to black going a piece down, because after white takes the queen, black has to take white's queen, and then white can just put black in check by taking this rook. Black will capture back, and now white is free to take black's knight. And you can see black is a clear piece down, and it should be white's game from here. However, if we go further back, you may think that black has another option. So instead of now taking the c5 pawn with the b6 pawn, black could simply capture the bishop with his knight. However, this only puts black into deeper trouble, because white captures the knight with the h2 pawn, and now the h-file is nicely open for the rook, and the queen is also attacking along this diagonal. So black can't simply now capture the pawn with his pawn, because it's going to be checkmate. Bang, it's checkmate. So that's clearly not an option. So black has to defend the h7 square. So if he makes this move, for example, then the bishop is only going to fall anyway, and the game is harder than it would have been from here, as black is now a piece down with an open h-file to defend against as well. Now, black actually had two chances to avoid this situation with the same line, which I will show you. So if we go back to after the trade-offs and the queen capture, instead of playing knight to f5, which is what happened in the game, black simply had to play c4 here, and then white would not have been able to pin the dark squared bishop, and black is fine in this situation. However, if we go back even further to when white initially played e4, then we can see that black does eventually have to capture the e4 pawn, but first could have played c4, attacking white's light squared bishop. This bishop will now drop back one square, and now black simply has to take on e4. But after all the trade-offs, black will not be in such a bad position, because white will be unable to pin black's dark squared bishop. Okay, so we know how this plays out. I'll just show you one more time. And you can see black is in a better position, as this bishop cannot be pinned by his rook. So all in all, this was a game between two high-ranking players, and black resigned this game on move 15, as he knew that he had made a blunder and would go a piece down. And this is just one example of why the London system can be so dangerous. Black probably did not think he was out of the opening move repertoire and just made natural-looking moves. In the end, it was just one wrong move that moved him from an equal position to resignation. And opinions are heavily divided on the London system. Some players believe it's boring chess and hate to play it. Others think it's a great system. In my opinion, I've only had mainly sharp attacking games with this system, and I really do recommend it to beginners, as it allows you to fully practice an opening sequence without black disrupting it with their defense, basically. That's all for now, guys, and there'll be more on the London system in some of the later videos. Thanks for listening. Take care.